and welcome to The Inside Out. I'm your host, Luke Renner. You have probably heard this podcast in audio form. I've dabbled a little bit with trying to put some of the audio-only versions on YouTube, and then I put some graphics or some text with that. That has proven to be incredibly labor-intensive for me, which translates into Luke's not going to do it. And so those things have been coming few and far between. So in the spirit of trying to find a way of working that I will actually like to do and will show up for, I thought it might be a good idea to try the idea of interviewing folks live, sort of Zoom-like, but this isn't Zoom. And for that, I have a guest today who I am really excited to have. Carolyn Baker, PhD, is a former psychotherapist and professor of psychology and history. Carolyn offers life and leadership coaching as well as spiritual counseling for people who want to live more resiliently in the present as they prepare for the future. She has authored many books. I actually went and tried counting, and I was somewhere around 17. Do you know how many you've written?
I would say 15, probably.
15? Okay. Including this one here, which we're not going to talk a lot about today, but I really am excited. Hopefully, Carolyn, if you're up for it, we can talk about this.
Definitely. Oh, yeah.
In the future. This is Confronting Christofascism, Healing the Evangelical Wound. So if you're in any way tied to the Christian church and current political trends and things that are going on in the United States especially, this is going to be a really interesting conversation and is a great book. So I would say, I will say hats off, but I'm not going to take my hat off, Carolyn.
Okay, sounds good.
Because this is a really good one. Another one that I have read, this was at your urging, is Journey to the Promised Land, How a Homeless Stranger Took Me Home. And do you have any quick thought you want to share about that? You don't have to, but...
Well, it was, given my Christian background, it was an opportunity for me to really go deep, deep, deep in this friendship with this person and within myself to see what being a Christian is really supposed to be.
Okay. Well, it's a really fascinating book. Of all the books that I've read of yours so far, which is only about 3 of, you say 15, this one's a lot more narrative in terms of its structure. It's a lot more of a story. Is that fair to say?
Yes, absolutely.
Your other books tend to be a lot more kind of like textbooks, honestly. I could easily see these being books that are read in college classrooms. So also great book. And then the book that I'm excited to use today as sort of the kickoff for us having these kinds of conversations. So this one's called Dark Gold, The Human Shadow and the Global Crisis. Now, one of the things I love, Carolyn, about your work, you are so loaded up with outside sources. When you put your books together. Now, again, this is maybe a little more of an exception because this is more of a personal journey.
That's a narrative, yeah.
That's a narrative. But like these 2 books are just dripping with great reference material. I have probably purchased, outside of your books, as a direct result of reading your books, I've probably purchased 20 or 30 other books.
My
because
goodness.
You just point, yeah, right? Because you point to all these great other voices. And so that's one of the things I love about your work. And I think in contrast to other authors who are doing work like yours, I feel like you do it more. I don't know if that's fair. What do you think? Is that?
Yeah, I really try to, not be the person on the soapbox. I really want to bring in other voices, other minds that have influenced me.
Yeah. Well, you do a great job at it. And like I said, if somebody wants to grow their collection, if they like some of what they hear in this interview today and they want to grow their collection, start by buying Carolyn's books and then just take all the rabbit trails that she throws at you and you will do well. You will start off with a great collection. So Carolyn lives and writes in Boulder, Colorado. Are you still out in Colorado?
I sure am.
Okay. And you manage your website, which is carolynbaker.net. So let's make sure we talk about that at the end so folks can find you. So if you don't mind, Carolyn, I thought I might read just a little bit out of the introduction to this book as a way to kick us off.
Sounds good.
Okay. You say James Hillman writes, Loving oneself is no easy matter just because it means loving all of oneself, including the shadow, where one is inferior and socially so unacceptable. The care one gives this humiliating part is also the cure. I'm going to keep going here for a moment. You then
Mm-hmm.
say Carl Jung, who you talk about Jung a lot. In
Right?
fact, the idea of the shadow comes from Jung. Is that fair to
Exactly.
say?
Yes.
Okay. So that was news to me. And since I've started reading your work and since I've branched off into other books that you point to, I've come to discover that a lot of people already know that. That's pretty common knowledge. But to those of you who have never heard of the shadow, this is a Jungian concept, and it's fairly well known. I mean,
Yeah.
can you say anything about that, Carolyn?
Well, I think that, he introduced a concept into modern psychology that was very inherent in Eastern traditions, in Buddhism, in Hinduism, that he really brought that to the West.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk a little bit more about what that is. So some of you just heard
Yeah.
just this little bit and said, what the heck are you guys talking about? If you don't know about the shadow, hopefully by the end of this conversation, you'll
Right.
know enough to be on your way. Carl Jung, as you point out, is said to have proclaimed on many occasions that the human shadow is 80% pure gold. In part, this is Jung's response to the Freudian perspective, and I love this, that humanity's dark side had absolutely no redeeming qualities. Can you talk about the difference between Freud and Jung in that sense?
Absolutely. Freud really, as you said, was really focused on the darkness of humanity. He's really the person who discovered the unconscious, but unfortunately, what he, through his own eyes, saw in the unconscious was primarily darkness. And
Right.
Jung came along and said, there's more to us than just the darkness. Yeah, there's a dark side, but there's more. And so with his concept of the shadow, he gave us a much more, I want to say, optimistic psychology. He certainly did not overlook the darkness by any stretch, but he had a much more balanced perspective, in my opinion.
And as you point out here, that he, in many cases thought of it as being 80% pure gold. Here is the title of your book, Dark Gold.
Right.
And so like you're like undergoing this exploration of mining the good, right, from our shadow. That's sort of what's
Right.
going on here, correct?
Yeah, exactly.
You say Jung argued that rather than writing off our inner darkness as hopelessly irredeemable, which maybe Freud might have been more prone to
Very
do,
much
I
so.
guess,
Yeah.
we can choose to explore, excavate, and mine it because therein lie priceless riches of love and compassion, or as Hillman would say, this is great, rotten garbage is also the fertilizer.
Yeah.
What was it about this shadow that captivated you? How long have you sort of been onto this thing? And what are you after by pursuing the exploration of the human shadow?
Well, as we may get into in this program, and certainly if we do more programs, I grew up as a fundamentalist evangelical Christian in the buckle of the Bible Belt, a few hours north of you. And
Indiana, right? You're a Hoosier, is that correct?
yeah, Hoosier, yeah.
All right.
Not anymore, but I was. And, I bought hook, line, and sinker, being an only child, into that religion and went off to Bible college and yada, yada. And my life was all about being good, trying to be good and obey the Bible and be a good Christian. And had absolutely no knowledge of a shadow. At 14, if you'd asked me what that was, is like, what are you talking about? But
Now, would it be safe to say, though, you did know and sort of embrace the idea of the depraved human nature,
Oh yeah,
which is not the shadow, right? So we need to clear that up.
I was like, I was like the Freudian perspective that we're
Okay.
all sinners and irredeemable at our core, and that's why we have to be born again, accept Jesus as our personal savior, blah, blah, blah.
We're saved by psychology.
So we won't go to hell and burn because of how depraved we are.
Yeah.
So I had no idea about a shadow, and not knowing about a shadow brought great pain and suffering in my life. Starting at the age of 20 when I got kicked out of a Bible college for being gay. And so as I evolved and developed and matured, I needed to be in psychotherapy. And I was in different kinds of psychotherapy until at the age of 40, some things happened that just kind of blew up my life. And I ended up with a Jungian therapist. And I worked with that therapist for 11 years, a couple of times a week, very intensely. So I really got to know Jung, not up here in my head, like here are facts about Jung, but the whole perspective of Jung was what we worked with in our therapy in relation to me. And so I was compelled by circumstances to look at my shadow and discovered in the process that is not, necessarily a depressing, horrible thing, although it's not pleasant. But I was able to discover not only the darkness in my shadow, but as I write about in the book, the gold is in my shadow. Because a shadow is something that begins when we're very young. As we interact with parents and with teachers and authority figures, we learn very quickly that there are parts of us that are not acceptable. And so for survival's sake, we learn to send those parts away, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
as Robert Bly says, we kind of tend to start putting them in a bag behind us. He calls it the long black bag. And we just put things in there, send them away. So that by the time, say, that we're 40, we have a very long black bag behind us. Now, there's shadow parts that we send away. They don't just go there and live. They're still very active in our lives in ways that we're not aware of. And oftentimes they will kind of erupt in our lives and maybe blow up our lives, as it did for me, or cause us to do things that up here in our heads, we would say, oh, that's probably not a good idea, or maybe that's even wrong. But we do them because we have not attended to the shadow. And so much of Jung's work was about discover what's in your shadow and then integrate it in your life. And you're going to find not only dark parts, but parts that are light and beautiful and creative, which he called the bright shadow.
It's an interesting thought to think about a shadow as a bright thing. Not even that long ago, after spending a lot of time poring through your books, and when I read books, Carolyn, I mark the shit out of these things. Like I've got marginalia coming out. And there's more Post-it notes. Like I do that thing. I forget who said it, but someone once talked about the true moment of owning a book is when you start to interact with the book. And and I do that with your books. And
you truly are a student.
I love it. Well, part of it too is I want to be able to pick that book up and flip back through and see like, these are the things that, impacted me. It's a little bit of a gamble because something may impact me in 10 years that didn't when I was highlighting that time.
Right.
But so I probably need to develop a discipline of rereading no matter what my marginalia says. But even though I've spent all this time working on this, I've even had to come back to you and say, now help me again, be clear. We're talking about the shadow. We're not just talking about bad stuff. And so it's not about bad, right?
Right. I can give you an example.
Okay.
One of the things that I hid in my shadow was the fact that I was gay.
Okay.
Um, didn't have any words for it. And when I came to understand what that really meant, of course, it was absolutely anathema, taboo, forbidden in my family, in my church. Um,
Right.
Later on, as I was able to come out fully to the world, I discovered this is a very beautiful thing. This is who I am. This has made me who I am. I am a creative, loving person. And, this has been in my shadow all the time. And now I'm going to really claim it. Um,
So
you
it's
know,
like this sense of like your essence being put in the bag means you're not
yeah,
being you, essentially, right? I
exactly.
mean,
Exactly. Yeah.
right.
And, it's like I always knew that I liked to write, but I remember the first time I wrote an article at the age of 12 and secretly behind my parents' back had it published in the local newspaper. And then I
Hmm.
told one of the neighbors about it and she told my mom. And my mom was just horrified. Who do you think you are that you can write?
Oh, really? Was this like
Well,
a touchy subject that you were writing
oh,
about, or
it was
just writing at all?
no, it was like, well, young people in our community need more things to do. That was the
Okay.
essence of it. It's
Okay.
like, who do you think and so
Yeah.
I shoved that back and I always got great grades in English. But as I continued to study in college, of course, there was opportunity to do more writing. And wow, here are these professors that want to hear what I have to say. Oh my
Hmm.
God. So I just flourished and flourished and flourished. But boy, there was really an attempt to tamp that down and put that in the bag.
Do you even use terms like bad or good? Like, how do you? I'm struggling with
Yeah, yeah.
the trope
Well,
of the
you could
word
use
shadow here.
you could use terms like self-destructive
Okay.
or not creative or not
Okay.
living up to full potential or repressed. You
Okay,
know,
to see that connects, that definitely connects.
uh-huh.
Because
Yeah,
repressed things can be again good or bad.
right,
I'm trying really hard to get out of that dualistic way
yeah,
of labeling everything
right.
good
Yeah.
bad.
Are these
Um,
things? Are these things? Are they things that can support life and
hmm,
support me and my humanity and help others and support others in their humanity and creativity?
right.
Do they facilitate connecting with ourselves, with each other, and with the earth?
Hmm. And if they're in the shadow and they do those things, we need to get them out. Is sort of the
Yeah,
idea, which is
yeah.
that mining
That's
that
the
that is
goal.
talked about.
That's the
That's
goal.
the dark gold. Dark
Yeah.
being because it's in the shadow, right? I
Right.
mean,
Exactly. Exactly.
can you give an example of how the shadow? So you do this very well in the book. You offer a lot of practical ways where we can actually see, what I'm doing right now is I'm making contact with my shadow. A lot of times, for example, we may critique things in the world. We may come out as being very anti this or cranky about that.
Mhm.
And one of the things that this work has really helped me to do is to recognize that a lot of times those very things that I'm being very critical of, which by the very nature of criticism, I'm probably rejecting or holding things at arm's length.
Mhm.
Um, that these are things that are actually in me. These are things that are actually a part of me.
Right.
They're not like a demon or a monkey on my back. They're not a curse that I have to get rid of. They're essential to who I am, and I haven't resolved or made peace with these things. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, one of the things we do with shadow material is invariably we project them out.
Okay.
And so when there is something about somebody else that irritates us,
Hmm.
among other ways of evaluating why we're so tweaked about it, is, okay, is there a part of me like that? is there some part of me that I'm not fully aware of that gets stirred up by who they are and what they're doing and how they're doing it.
Yeah. This
So that's
actually reminds me for me, okay, so a very practical, this sort of just sparked for me. I have struggled a lot. You and I have talked for the better part of a year now through just, off and on conversations. And we've gotten to know each other a little bit. And I've confessed a lot to you of my hangups, my fears,
sure.
my concerns, my worries. So I'm a preacher's kid. I come from a background which is probably not too dissimilar from yours. We were, I should have written this down, but so we were non-denominational, fundamentalist, evangelical, charismatic Christians. So it was sort of like, speaking in tongues. I have cast out demons. I mean, I thought I did.
Right.
I've had the experience of casting out demons.
Right.
I don't believe that that's what happened now. Laid hands on the sick. I've all this stuff. By the time I started personally going like, I don't, I don't know that I'm loving this anymore was when people were bringing home the blessing from conferences that they had attended. You'd hear about some move of God in Toronto or, later on down in Florida. And people would literally leave your home church and go to that church to sort of get it on them, I guess.
Yeah.
And then they, the expectation was that they would come home and, the glory would travel with them. And so as I was getting older and things were getting more and more ridiculous, and I'm watching people who I love stumbling around up front of church, literally acting drunk, people bringing in, I mean, drunk in the spirit actually happened for a long time. It was probably more the clucking like chickens. And it was like really just kind of dumb shit. It was shit that I was like, why do God even need this? Like, this doesn't even make sense. So it was about that time that I started to, walk away from that stuff. And I spent, I would say a period of maybe a decade or more really divorcing myself. It wasn't a light switch kind of experience. It was slow. It was steady. But one of the things I kept crashing into was I would have all of these, what felt like really clear-headed, clear-minded moments of rational thought. Like, for example, Philip Gulley, who's a Quaker author, doesn't live too far. He's also a Hoosier. In one of his books, I believe it is his book, If Grace is True, Why God Will Save Every Person. So it was this idea of universal salvation for everybody, which right there, hard stop, that's devil stuff, based on how I was, right? Just no way. But one of the things he asked in his book was this idea of how do we make sense of the idea that Hitler is going to burn in hell for eternity, the same hell that the 6 million Jews that he slaughtered are going to burn in beside him, because remember, they didn't accept Jesus as the Messiah. And so because that was the essential way to not burn in hell, the way I was raised is, you declare that Jesus Christ is the Son of God and that he died for your sins and you accept the salvation. Because supposedly most of the Jews that Hitler murdered wouldn't have accepted that, then, according to the rule, they're going to, burn with him. So that was a moment I remember, like all these years later, that stood out as like, yeah, that doesn't make any sense. No. And of course, the way we were raised and the way religion works is one of the very first sort of checksums that it puts in place is get over your big-headed thinking, get over your bright ideas and your attempt to think that you can rationalize these things. It's that God's ways are bigger than our ways line, which I'd love to talk about more down the road. Sure. But back to this point that I was trying to make, one of the things you've seen me struggle with is coming to a place of feeling comfortable talking about these things when I come from a Christian tradition, which those people who raised me that way are very much still that way. Mm-hmm. They still very much believe those things. And I'm not only talking about my parents. There was a whole community of people. There were so many good things that did come from that. Mm-hmm. And yet I feel like there's so many bad things that come from some of the what I consider to be really toxic ideas
Yes.
that are tied to, I don't know if it's American Christianity or what. And Christianity, you'll hear me over this and other episodes, you'll hear me really taking a swing at Christianity a lot. That's primarily because that's where I came from.
Right.
I'm not trying to be unduly harsh in that direction. I think many religions carry some of the same toxic problems and thinking. But man, I am digressing. You have seen me be terrified to speak up.
Yes,
You have seen me
right.
really struggle. Like the fact that this is even happening today. I wrote you an email before we started and said, like, you know, there's a part of me that wants to cancel this.
Yeah.
And that's a very real part of me because I've always wanted to get along. I've always wanted to be acceptable. I've always wanted to, not make waves or cause too much trouble. And we're talking about the shadow, and this is really interesting to me because as I shared with you not long ago, whereas I have cast off a lot of my belief in purely doctrinal things, theological things, like I don't believe that God needed somebody to die on a cross to forgive our sins. I just don't believe that. I'm not sure I believe there's a God at all. But if there is, I just don't buy that. If love's worth anything at all, then love doesn't require blood to hit the ground in order to love. I can love and I don't require that. And supposedly God's better than me, right? So these are, again, thoughts that I was having, which the whole, well, it doesn't have to make sense to you. Throw away. We were taught from such a young age, because of your sinfulness, from day one, from the moment you pop out of your mother.
That's right.
You need redeemed. You haven't even done anything. You've inherited what was done.
You were born in sin.
You were born in sin, born unacceptable,
Right.
Wanted by God, but unacceptable.
Yeah.
And so there's this whole, I can't honestly wrap my head around what it looks like for a person to come to faith, the faith that I had later in life, as compared to the way, like for you and for me, being born into it.
Right.
Were you born into it or did it come later?
Time. Oh, totally. Yeah.
Yeah. So, there just wasn't another thing. Everything that wasn't that was just the devil. It was wrong.
Exactly.
And fundamentally, therefore, really dangerous. And so it was designed to tap into our amygdala, which we didn't even know what the hell an amygdala was. Nobody knew about this, about trauma or any of that shit, back when I was in church. Even in the secular world, the information that was being onboarded about trauma back in the mid 70s was still really relatively new.
Yeah.
So we couldn't have known, but this doctrine and this theology was rooted in our unconscious need to survive.
Yeah.
And so when you terrify an itty bitty kid from day one with this idea of, if you screw this up, if you fuck up just the right way, just enough times, you're going to burn in a fiery, torturous hell. This is worst case scenario, forever. And there's no moment at that point to say, I might have made a mistake. Can I get another, opportunity? Nope. You got to get it right before your heart stops beating. All this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so I cast off all the religion, but here I am at 48 now, 10 years into healing from trauma. Only here recently kind of coming to grips with the fact that part of my trauma is religion. And I want to talk about that someday with you, probably not in depth here today. But it's a very important topic to me because I'm recognizing that before certain things happened to me physically, or while things were happening to me that were affecting my body, my mind was being affected by this torturous thought of getting it wrong,
right,
and paying an ultimate price. And so at 48, even though I say I don't believe any of that religious stuff anymore, I still honor. I was spanked a lot. We called it spanking. It was beating. I was beaten a lot.
Eating.
And I
Yeah.
still honor the message that's married to getting beaten a lot, which is you're better seen and not heard.
Right.
Don't upset things.
Right.
I went through a phase where I struggled to go like, was I raised in a cult? Was it a cult?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I looked at the criteria, Stephen Hassan puts out the BITE model,
Right.
cults try to control behavior, information, thoughts, and emotions. And all of those are checked. But I remember thinking, well, yeah, but my folks always let me question. I've heard stories about religious folks who weren't even allowed to ask the questions. And I was allowed to question. So how trapped was I really? Then the light comes on not all that long ago where I realized, how is it that at this age, when I ask the questions, I come up with very, very different answers than I did when I asked them as a kid. Because as a kid, I was told I could ask. I always came back to the prescribed answer.
Right.
So it was this extra level of fuckery, quite frankly, where I thought I was free.
Yeah.
I wasn't really quite free
No.
to land wherever. And
No.
part of my shadow is this. It's like with you wrote something. You wrote something and you did it. It was good and it mattered and it connected. And somebody saw that, your mother, I guess, and said, like, who do you think you are?
My mother.
Cast that out. And here it is all these years later. I mean, you're a lot of things.
Books.
But if you're anything, you're an author. You're someone who writes, but you write on purpose. Mm-hmm. And your words and your work are desperately needed. And when I think about you having a moment as a child where you made contact with who you are today, am I allowed to ask roughly how old you are now?
I am 78.
Okay. And you've been writing for how long now, roughly?
Oh my goodness. Well, a lot of, writing in college for college stuff, but I published my first book in 2000.
So you've been pretty busy over the last
I have.
20 or so years.
Exactly.
Cranking out really important stuff. Mm-hmm. And to think that you made contact with that part of yourself as a child and had it swatted down, thrown into the bag over your shoulder.
Right.
And that's something I've seen in myself where I've struggled with. Prior to finding the courage to just do this, I would find myself watching other people saying things in the world. And maybe peers, friends of mine perhaps. And I would think to myself in kind of this Mr. Grinch sort of way, who do they think they are that anybody gives a shit what they think? Mm-hmm. Who do they think they are that they have something worth saying? Who do they think they are that someone should tune into them? And so that would happen. And then I would also, when I considered firing up a camera or an audio recorder and saying things myself, then I would hear me say, and I would say this to friends I'd have lunch with, I would say this stuff out loud. I would say, I don't want to come off like I'm an expert. I don't want people to think that I think that I'm some kind of big deal or that I know something. And again, so here I am criticizing others. Here I am telling myself, whatever you do, don't make people think that you think you have something to say.
Right.
I would even say, I would much rather people see me as a guy who's willing to ask good questions.
Right.
All of this is a rejection of something inside of me, similar to what you said when you touched on that writing thing as a child, is that I'm supposed to be talking and being okay with that and being confident with that. And my first contact with that truth about myself, I saw it as criticism of others and rejection of a certain kind of self, a certain way of being me.
Right.
Is that kind of what we're talking about with the shadow in terms of like how we, practically speaking, how we crash into it in our own lives?
Well, the shadow lives in the unconscious. Okay.
Right.
I mean, parts of it we kind of have clues about, and definitely when we project, That's the
Yes.
outward manifestation, but it lives in the unconscious. And if we're not willing to own the possibility that we have a shadow and we don't understand what that means, then we will project it, or we will do things that come from the black bag without our being aware of it. That's why
Yeah.
it's so important to understand the shadow and do some shadow work to prevent that.
How in the
And,
world? So let's
and
get practical for people. How do you do shadow work?
well, that's what Dark Gold is about. I've got a
Yeah.
lot of exercises in that book, little practices, little things that people can do to just begin to explore the topic. You don't have to go hook, line, and sinker into it. Oh, I have a shadow. I got to do this work, but, kind of tease it out and
Yeah.
begin to explore. Because if we don't, the consequences can be very grave, very serious. And so we have this gift of being able to do that. Let's do it. And what that's going to produce, I have found, are people who are more compassionate, who
Hmm.
are more caring, who are more empathetic, and, just overall can live better with other human beings.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I would say that the more I have confronted these elements in myself, again, as you point out, a lot of times they're showing up as a projection. So I don't even know I'm thinking about me. I don't know it's about me. I think it's about you. I think
Right.
it's about this thing I'm criticizing.
Yeah.
And it's like once you learn about projection, that's a thing. And once you learn that a lot of times, if not, I hate to say always, but a lot of times projection comes from within, right? If you think of
Right.
yourself as an actual film projector,
Yeah.
uh, you know, the thing that's being cast out has to come from, a source behind it.
Yeah.
And
And let me
so,
just hasten to add that your projections aren't always wrong.
correct.
There's a lot of truth in those projections sometimes, and other times they're just completely off the wall.
And it's not necessarily, the job is not necessarily to say, is this projection correct or incorrect?
No, no.
It's more, I feel like for me, it's been to go like, well, where is that coming from?
Yeah, yeah. And see, projections can be positive as well. It's
Talk about that.
well, yeah. It's kind of like when we go around. This is what we call the golden shadow. We go around, and perhaps you see a very famous and competent anchor on one of the news networks, and you just go, oh man, I just wish I were like him. I just wish, he's so magical, and he's so bright, he's so articulate. I just wish I could be that way.
Mm.
Well, it's like you're projecting that you don't have the potential to be that way, that you don't have gifts that are just as powerful, just as bright and beautiful as his.
Hmm. It's so, see, to me, the shadow is so rich.
Yes,
And I think that like calling it dark gold is, we're thinking about richness. It's
yes,
like just what you just did there. I mean, because when you were suggesting the news anchor and defining the qualities, I was thinking, okay, so she's going to say here, and so those are qualities maybe you should pursue, or those are qualities that you could say these are values that I have, and that's a good thing to know, and that's probably also there as well. But you pointed out how you might actually be saying that by it existing in this person and me saying, look at it over there, that I'm
yeah,
unwilling to see that it's over here too.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
I love
Absolutely.
that.
Yeah.
The shadow is an interesting concept for me. So you've seen my film, What Lies Inside, correct?
I just saw it this weekend again.
You watched it again?
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you for that.
And shared it with friends.
Well, thank you for that.
Yeah.
You say in this introduction something that touches on, I didn't have words for it at the time, but as in the last couple of years of working on that film, this would be during the time when Trump was elected, and our country just was undergoing what felt, certainly in my lifetime, you can speak for yourself, but just felt like nothing we had ever gone through before.
Right. I agree.
And a lot of this stuff we're going to go over when we talk about this book.
Right.
But the church as I knew it, which I had left by this point, was just looking more and more foreign to me. Like I didn't understand. I was seeing, I believe that Trump has been an incredible catalyst for shadow work in so many different directions.
I hope I'll have the opportunity to talk about how he is our shadow.
I would love that. So, okay, we just booked our next conversation. How's that? Perfect. So put that one on the books.
Sure.
You say this again in the introduction. You say, in the following pages, we will closely examine both the personal shadow, which we all must contend individually, and the collective shadow,
Right.
to which the personal shadows of some 7 billion people contribute. The influence of both on the human species is gargantuan. I love that you say gargantuan. And the current global crisis that threatens to erase all life from the planet Earth is a horrifying testimony to the destructiveness of the shadow, unseen and unhealed. I'm jumping ahead. You say, the only way to begin taking responsibility for the collective shadow is to be willing to be accountable for the personal one. And so brilliant. When I read that, I knew immediately right then, this Carolyn lady, I think I hadn't even reached out to you yet. She put her finger on what I was feeling when I was trying to land the film. The film is about trauma. Trauma is an enormous subject. I knew pretty early in to the process. I thought it was going to take a year. It took 6 years. I knew pretty early in, like, this can't be prescriptive. I can't say, here's what trauma is, here's how trauma works, and here's how you get rid of it. Because it's so vast, it's so different for so many people. And so I was stuck in this pickle of, okay, I've kicked the ball to say, I'm going to talk about trauma for a couple of hours. But then I didn't know, like, so what? What's the so what? How do I frame this when I can't get granular about, like, if I just talked granularly about my trauma, that's not going to do anybody any good. And if I tried to just say, and this is what this kind of trauma looks like, and this is what a futile effort. And it was in those last couple of years where I realized, like, the big deal here, as I saw it, and you said it there, and you say it so well in this book, and really it flows through all of your work that I've read so far, is this idea that it's not just no big deal. It does matter what's happening inside each of us on a global scale. It matters privately for sure, but more than privately, because a lot of us, especially those of us who were raised under toxic religious thinking, maybe we haven't kicked that to the curb fully yet. Maybe we think we have, but we're still kind of under its boot heel.
Yeah.
We might be thinking, like, you know what, solving my own problems, it doesn't really matter. I'll focus on what's going on with my kids. I'll focus on, am I giving enough in this way or that way? Am I making enough sacrifices? Am I being enough like Jesus? Whatever the case may be, we will push our own shadow work away. We won't be calling it that because we're like, you know what? I was trained that I don't really matter. That's like, again, back to that human sinfulness. What I want is last on the list, and the list is forever long. I'm never going to get around to dealing with my junk. It's not important. But you're pointing out, and I was able to get there with the film, I believe, although not in these words. It's this idea that what lies inside, there's the name of the film, what lies inside absolutely finds its way into the world. And it's not always good.
That is why when I first saw the title of that film, I just thought, oh my God, somebody is talking about this, and it wasn't in terms of the shadow, but the whole thing was really about the shadow in certain ways. And it's like, oh man, somebody's talking about the inner world. God bless him already. I haven't even seen, I don't know what he's doing, but bless him.
And what I love about this, what I love about the nature of nature, I suppose, is that, at the time you saw the film, you're clearly very well steeped in Jungian psychology, the work of shadow, and all of this. I didn't even have these terms, and
Right.
yet I was still touching on the exact same idea.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's what I love about the nature of nature, the nature of truth, the nature of being honest. And so I'm so grateful to have encountered you and your work. You've been such a good friend so far. I love the fact that we're as far apart in terms of age and even physical distance as we are. It kind of creates these limitations which force
Yeah.
us to experience each other in different ways. I think
Right.
maybe if we had coffee a lot, we wouldn't have
Yeah.
had some of the conversations.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Yeah.
I with just a few minutes left for this episode, I'm curious from your point of view, if somebody has heard this and they're like, okay, my interest is piqued. I've either heard about this shadow stuff or I'm hearing about it for the first time, but I'm sold. It makes sense. That's kind of how it hit me when I saw it. What are some things you would say to folks to sort of, and you give, like you pointed out, and I'm glad you mentioned that, you do give at the end of each chapter practical things people can do, little steps that people can take. So I don't expect you to rattle all those off here. But if you had maybe one or two things that a person could do that might just sort of start them on the journey of thinking in this way, first of all, I would say everybody who has heard this conversation and any part of it has sort of sparked with you and you've gone like, that makes sense to me. This is something I've thought about. Just go buy this book. Where do they find this? What's the best place? I got it on Amazon.
Well, they can certainly find it on Amazon. And if you go to my website, carolynbaker.net, it will take you to Amazon to buy the book.
Okay.
But you can also get the audiobook, the only audiobook I have so far of Dark Gold. You can get that on my website. I read it myself.
Okay.
And then I would just say to folks, it's like, okay, just treat this as an exploration. And first know that at your core, you are holy. You are good. At your core, you are a beautiful human being. But there are other parts to you. We're all very complicated creatures. And so just treat it as an exploration, using curiosity instead of criticism.
I love that. That's one of my, if I had to pull off a top 5 things, tools, personal resources to fall back on when doing any kind of healing work, any kind of introspective work, curiosity over criticism. I mean, what a game changer. For me, that has practically looked like, instead of, for example, like, I'm such an awful person for looking at porn, right? A lot of people struggle with that. I'm such an awful person for looking at porn. What a horrible person I am. And the curiosity angle on that might be like, I wonder why I'm so drawn to that. I wonder why I have the relationship with that I do. I wonder why. And so it's just that slight twist.
Just a
you
slight
go from
twist.
You go from being your own judge and jury to being like, again, it's almost like a child. And there's no risk in finding the answer. So I love curiosity. Yeah. I would also throw on there, and I think you kind of said this, but just to pull it out, especially if you come from a religious upbringing, where you have really had it pounded into your head that what you think, your big ideas, your logic, your reasoning, your curiosity, your questions, that anything that comes out of your own noggin must summarily be dismissed, thought of as bad, thought of as like, that's the thing we're watching out for, is to do everything in your power to overcome that and take your own self seriously.
Yeah, absolutely.
The curiosity is key, but you can't be curious if you won't even hear the thought.
That's exactly right. That's why I say start out with, I'm a beautiful human being.
Absolutely.
At my core, I'm lovable and I'm innocent. I'm not guilty.
That's hard. That's so easy to say, right? But if you've been trained the way we were,
yeah,
that can be a really tough
It's tough.
place to arrive at.
Yeah.
And I think for me, I got there slowly but surely by being kind to myself privately a lot. I find that if you do it in front of people who were formerly critical, or you do it with people who don't appreciate the gravity of the weight of self-rejection that's been put on you, they may sort of flippantly be like, what are you talking about? Like, I mean, it was a Saturday Night Live character. Was it Stuart Smalley, looks in the mirror and self-affirmation?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it can be to a point where people think it's silly, but truthfully, when you've had it hammered into you over and over, and sometimes through physical, repercussions,
Absolutely.
Literally hammered into you, it takes time, it takes patience, and I think doing that in private can be a helpful way to get there.
Absolutely.
Carolyn, as we're wrapping this up, is there any way, anything else you would like to say to folks? How can they reach out to you? Why would they reach out to you? Are there services that you offer? I know you stay pretty busy writing. Tell us where you're at these days and how people might make contact.
Okay. Well, you can go to my website, carolynbaker.net, but if you want to connect with me directly, you can email me at carolyn@carolynbaker.net. I do offer life coaching. If people are going through a rough patch and they want someone to talk to about anything, really, you can certainly reach out to me. And most likely, you're going to be hearing more of me and Luke banter together in the near future.
And to everybody who's watching and who saw this, because if you've watched me fumbling over myself over the years trying to figure out how I'm putting myself into the world, you will recognize this as a different thing. If you've enjoyed this, if you have liked this, please, there's a number of things you can do. Subscribe on YouTube, because that helps. Share it, leave comments, like it, all the stuff that you can do there. Carolyn and I have talked prior to this that if this is well received and people like this, we're going to try and do this more. And we're still in agreement on that, it sounds like.
Yes. I forgot to mention my YouTube channel, which is the Carolyn Baker channel.
Great. And I'll find the link to that, and I'll put that in the description of this video. So it's for your website and all of that, so people can find you and connect with you easily.
Thank you.
So, well, thank you so much, Carolyn, for this roughly hour-long conversation. I'm super excited to have done this. We're working on figuring out a name. What was the name idea that we left? You had an idea. Do you remember?
Yeah, my idea was Holy Heretics.
And I said, can a heretic be holy? To which you said,
of course, we're all holy.
We're all holy. And I love this about you. Carolyn, you would be, to some of the people who raised me, you would be the personification of a witch.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yep. From your sexual orientation to some of the stuff that you say, even the idea of like, we are God, red flags are going up. I mean, I'm 48. I don't even believe this shit anymore. And the flags still go up.
That's right. They do. They do.
But I can say to my audience, and I can say it to you here, you are one of the most beautiful people I have had the privilege of getting to know. And I am just thrilled to have made contact with your work. And if all I do is bring folks like yourself, a little more sunlight and say, folks, look over here, read these things, then I've done enough. But the thing I love about working with you and talking with you is that you make it conversational and you give these opportunities for us to you're kind of letting me heal a little bit while we talk. And I love that.
Absolutely. And that's the way I feel about, our audience. Hopefully this will be a healing elixir for people who listen and watch.
Absolutely. Well, Carolyn, thank you so much for joining me today. Hopefully we can do this again very soon.
Me too. And thanks for having me.